UFOs, White House, Disclosure, Archons, Anunnaki, Enki, Enlil, Lucifer, Marduk, UN, NWO, Vatican, Sol, Luce, Harvesters, Matrix, NASA, Fluff, Robert Stanley, West Penn Papers, latest leak project. Sit back and enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I'm your host, Rex Bear, and we have Robert Stanley with us from unicusmagazine.com. Now, Robert is a professional, an engineer, a researcher, and the amount of information that he brings to the table tonight here at the Leak Project is nothing short of astonishing. Now, we get into not only decades of verified evidence and documentation and photographs of unidentified flying objects over Washington, D.C., as well as a time that they even landed on the White House rooftop. We also get into the Battle of L.A. Now, Mr. Stanley was visited from an unmarked black helicopter several years ago when he started becoming outspoken on specific topics, and that sparked his interest even more to get into certain genres and forbidden discussions, I guess you could say. Now, Mr. Stanley claims he has met Enki. Yes, the Enki, the manipulator of mankind, the genetic scientist himself. Wait till you hear his testimony about that. Nothing short of astonishing. On top of that, Mr. Stanley has also correlated enough information that I feel parallels strongly with Zecharia Sitchin, Mauro Bellino, Gerald Clark, and other researchers into the ancient astronaut theory. He gets into details and descriptions of Enki, Enlil, and other factions fighting for control of an empire that has gone galactic. Details of the Archons, where they came from, how they influence not only mankind, but he feels the Archons have overcame many minds in the Anunnaki bloodlines. And he talks about how he feels that Enki was actually taken over by these Archon parasites and other Anunnaki when they went into a forbidden zone of the universe because they felt that they could do anything. And the information he brings to the table is very compelling. So I'd strongly recommend sitting through this 2-hour presentation if you want to hear about the Archons, about the Anunnaki, about the ancient astronaut theory. And a lot of this information is highly detailed, and we get really deep down this rabbit hole. On top of that, he talks about the genetic manipulations that Enki was a part of and still is a part of, being a genetic scientist, humans being created for substance given to the Anunnaki and the Archons, essentially, prophecies and ancient scriptures correlating with the Archons, the ancient astronauts falling from heaven, the soul trap, what appears to surround the outer parts of our planet that can also be verified scientifically. One thing I find very interesting is his details on the reincarnation trap, the soul light tunnel. And a lot of times people say when they die, the first thing they see is their ancestors. And he thinks that might be some type of trap just to keep us in this recycled situation here to continue to be a food source and supply source for these Archons. He also gets into what we can do as a collective whole to protect ourselves from the Archon influence, and it's very simple. It's a 3-step process, essentially. If you can follow these 3 steps, you're going to have a much better chance of eliminating any Archon influence that is around you and your family members. And he talks about not only is evil contagious, but so is kindness and acts of love and peace. You know, just like smiling at somebody out of the blue. Give somebody a genuine smile that looks that maybe they're having a bad day, and you smile at them. It's going to cheer them up a little bit, and that might be contagious. Now, also, wait until you hear about what Robert says the creator of this planet and our species, who the creator is, where she's from, Very good information. So I recommend going to unicusmagazine.com. Check out Robert Stanley on unicusmagazine.com. Also check out our YouTube channels, youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. We're on the William Wallace YouTube channel. And make sure to become a contributing member at leakproject.com. We had somebody that just ordered 15 decals from us, so thank you for that. I hope you enjoy the decals and you can spread those out far and wide. Hope everybody's having an amazing day and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon. All right, folks, we have a real treat for you tonight. We have Robert Stanley with us, and we are going to get into some topics that are very controversial. Now, Robert, I am just very honored to speak with you tonight here at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
Doing well, Rex. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, it's an honor. I know that there was a couple of times before we were going to get together, but certain things came up, so this is meant to be now. And if you would please, Robert, many of our listeners have heard of you, but I would say at least half haven't. I mean, the Leak Project's just growing leaps and bounds. We're adding about 5,000 subscribers a month, and we're hitting approximately 1 million viewers a month, too. So it's great.
Good for you.
Yeah, well, it's good to be a part of it. I'm just enjoying all the data and meeting the people and getting this out there. So tell us about yourself, and then we're going to get into the books that you put together and your information on the Anunnaki and some other anomalies.
Okay, very good. So, as you said, my name's Robert Stanley. I'm originally from Malibu, California, in Los Angeles. I guess everybody knows where that is now. I moved to Rhode Island in 2008, lived there for about 7 years, and I'm currently living in Hong Kong with my wife and son and dog. But I have worked as a corporate journalist for Honda Research and Development in Torrance, California. I'm currently a corporate editor for a factory auditing service here in Hong Kong that does that internationally. So I'm busy with that. However, I'm also, as you said, the author of 2 books about UFOs and extraterrestrials in Washington, D.C. And I hesitate to even ask people to look into it because it scares them. The implications are just absolutely enormous, and I realize that there's not much they can do. There's no one they can ask for help on this. So that's one of the projects I just kind of got involved in.
Do you know Wilbur Allen? Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, that's actually how I got started back in 2005. It was Daryl Sims forwarded me an email from Mr. Allen with the photographs taken July 16, 2002. So, and Daryl was asking me if I thought those were real photographs or not, which you can't tell from an email, obviously. And in this day and age, everybody does Photoshop or more. So I spoke to Mr. Allen because there was a contact number there, and we've been in touch ever since. That was May of 2005. But that's what led to me writing a first article in July of 2005 about the photographs that Mr. Allen took at the Capitol, July 16, 2002, of a swarm or a fleet of UFOs over the Capitol. One landed on the roof. When I published that article in July of 2005, I was visited by a black helicopter at my home in Los Angeles. I was living in Torrance, California at the time. And that was a shock. I was not expecting that. I don't think anybody ever does. But as a result, I got very curious as to why anybody would send that kind of an asset to my home and try and intimidate me, which they did. But at the same time, I was really curious. It's like, okay, you obviously are concerned that I've published these pictures on the internet and in print. And so I started investigating deeper, and I quickly found there was over 100 different cases in the public record. And I realized that was too much for an article, so I started writing a book. As I wrote the book, of course, the first chapter is an interview with Mr. Allen and an analysis of the photographs that he took on 35 millimeter film, people. Okay, I want you to understand. He had that film analyzed by an independent film lab in Washington, D.C. It's called Penn Camera. It was right across from the FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C. It's now not there. It was there for many years, and the FBI used them. But there was a particular technician that we had on that we recorded him actually analyzing this strip of film, and he said it was authentic. He couldn't say what was on the film, but that it was unretouched, which was important to the narrative. So, in any case, the book eventually that I wrote was called Close Encounters on Capitol Hill, and it features interviews with people like Daryl Sims, Mr. Allen, um, uh, Command Sergeant Major Robert Dean, Colonel Wendell Stevens before he passed away. But it also has over 200 eyewitness accounts of UFO activity in Washington, D.C. from 1850 to 2006 when I published the first book. However, after I published the first book and I went on national radio to promote it, my website was hacked by a company in Virginia who happened to own the software that the server was running. So they actually had a back door. They were able to go into the server where I was renting space for my website at the time with those photos. Somebody went in there and took those photos down after I was on a national radio show. And the people that owned the server said they'd never seen anything like it before. They were unable to get in. And of course, I couldn't get in either. So I had to move my website to a different server in order to display those photographs. That was the second mistake they made, because now I was really, really curious as to why they didn't want people to see these pictures. So now that was late 2000, December 2006 is when the first book came out, and I continued to investigate through 2007. I found that there was not only more eyewitness accounts that I had missed, because they're scattered all over the place. They're not centrally, I mean, up until I started doing my research and publications, nobody had collated it all into one timeline. So, and the photographs were starting to come more frequently, photographs and video, and even historic movies, which of course have been, people are claiming that these are fake. In fact, there's a gentleman over, I guess I shouldn't even say his name, but there are people right now, just this week, that are saying that there are no authentic photographs or movies of UFOs over Washington, D.C., which is historically inaccurate. The public record says that there was hundreds of people on the National Mall in the 1950s, specifically 1952, when they showed up like something like at least 80 times that year. The press only reported 2 or 3 of those occasions, but they showed up, over 80 times, according to my research. And people, according to the historic record, people were on the mall with cameras, both still pictures and movie cameras, filming the event, or events, I should say, because it was becoming quite frequent. And naturally, people are interested. And I think not all of them were locals, by the way. They had, Washington, D.C. has a reputation of being a tourist destination because of the monuments and the museums, etc. And so I wasn't surprised by that. But what the problem is, we can't seem to find those movies and those pictures. So I asked Colonel Stevens about it, because I knew he had one of the largest collections, before he passed away, of UFO photos and movies. And he told me about this. He said that the military, U.S. military, went around Washington, D.C., the surrounding area, and they literally took away, they confiscated people's cameras and film of the events that had been transpiring in Washington, D.C. So we don't know where those things went. Colonel Stevens had some ideas, but we don't have access to that. Okay. But what's really curious to me was that the year that I started my investigation, Channel 4, which is an affiliate of the History Channel in England, broadcast a documentary featuring Nick Cook with Aviation Week, I believe, Jane's Defense Weekly, sorry, and in Britain. And he did this documentary, and in that there was a short clip of a movie taken at the Capitol on the mall, looking at the Capitol building with that fleet of UFOs coming behind the Capitol dome. I think a lot of your viewers will be familiar with it because it's been on the internet for some time, thanks to myself and Mr. Allen. No thanks to the people in Britain. And in fact, when I contacted Nick Cook, not Nick Pope, okay, Nick Cook, uh, he said he didn't know where the producers got that from. Okay, so some people say, and actually quite a few people are saying it's CGI, it's computer generated imagery. I agree. It was a digital camera that someone took to an archive, because as you know, when you go into an archive, you can't just check things out. You can look at them, but you can't take them out. So what happened, I believe, is that some producer went into an archive that is obviously quite secure and only people with clearance or permission or an invitation can go in there. And they went in there and they literally took a digital camera, movie camera, and they made a copy. Imagine that's the screen back there. I'm watching it. I'm taking a digital copy of an analog film that's running in an archive. That's where it came from.
I
But that's a
see.
real analog film. That's definitely exactly what people describe seeing on the National Mall. And it also fits the still photograph, the only photograph we had for many years of that same fleet of UFOs passing over the Capitol in July of 1952, that thousands of people saw it, and it showed up on radar. The the military sent jets up to intercept. Every time they did, these things would literally pop out, and then the jets would land, and these things would pop back in. It was only because of the final photograph that Mr. Allen took on July 16, 2002, at the U.S. Capitol, that we were able to figure out how they're doing that. The final photograph that he took, which is a time exposure of, I believe, at least 3 minutes at night, shows 4 UFOs skipping across the sky, much like when you skip a stone across water. It's like they appear, disappear, until they enter a hole in the sky that they created, a wormhole, stargate, portal, whatever you want to call it, okay? But we can actually see that in the photograph. And it took us quite a long time to figure that out, because we'd never seen anything like it. And I'm not sure any civilians had ever seen any photographic evidence like that before. But it wasn't the only wormhole that he caught on film that night. There was another picture, and you know, anybody can see this, by the way. Either go to ufodc.com, or you can check out my website, unicusmagazine.com. It's spelled UNICUS magazine.com, and click on books. When you scroll down, you'll see the free DC UFO images. You can click on that and look at some of these photographs and movies that I'm talking about, and specifically the photograph that Mr. Allen took, which absolutely shocked me, because I'm the one that found the wormhole that he'd inadvertently took. So imagine this. Imagine we got a picture, okay? And on one little point of the picture is completely black. And I asked him, I said, did you damage the negative when you were developing it? Because it looks like there's nothing there. There's nothing. It's completely black. And he examined it and he said, no, there's nothing. So I started zooming in on it to take a closer look, and I couldn't believe what I saw. When I look at it, it blows my mind, okay? Because what starts off as literally like the head of a pin. It's so small, it really is tiny. As you blow it up, it's no longer black. You see that there is a glowing white object in there, surrounded by a sort of a reddish and blue light. There's no way anybody could have faked this, okay? It's so microscopic. And as I said, these negatives that were turned into positives, because it's slide film, which is really hard to fake, okay? If anybody wanted to do it, believe me, it would be evident, and the film technician would have found that. So, but this particular thing is so bizarre because it's microscopic on the film, but when you zoom into it using digital technology, you can see that there's something in this surrounded by blackness. There's this light, this oval white light. It's absolutely amazing. But that's my long-winded way of saying that these guys, whoever they are, have that ability to pop in and out of our dimension or reality anytime they feel like it. And they've been doing so all over the planet, and specifically in Washington, D.C. for quite some time.
That's fascinating. And once again, I'd strongly recommend anybody that has a chance to listen to this podcast go to unicusmagazine.com. If you have a chance to pick up a copy of Close Encounters on Capitol Hill, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C., I mean, just some groundbreaking stuff. Even though these images are from early 2000s and beyond, I had a chance to speak with Wilbur on the Leak Project about 7 or 8 months ago. So we even have a podcast where he was sharing those images that you're referring to, and the footage was just, it's incredible. And I haven't seen anything like it. So you said this stuff really started popping out in the 50s. I'm thinking of Battle of L.A. also. Were these craft?
That was the 40s. The Battle of L.A. was in the 40s, and things were crashing before Roswell. They crashed in Missouri. And it was supposedly crashed in the San Bernardino Mountains outside of Los Angeles, where I'm from.
Now, also, Daryl Sims is a great guy. I've had a chance to interview him a couple of times, and he talks a lot about how he feels that all of the ET abductions that people have that are legit, they're actually clones. And, you know, there's the different models. You've got the sports car, you've got the Corvette, you've got the utility model. What's your take on that?
I would highly encourage people to go again to my website and click on articles. And one of the first banners up there is called Technocide. And it's all about the Luciferian agenda and how artificial intelligence, androids, nanobots, transhumanism, the singularity. There's a really good book out too. When you click on Technocide, there's a link there to a new book about this, the transfiguration of mankind and the singularity, and how it's going to affect everybody, especially those that willingly participate. Now, my take on this is it's not new. That the various groups have been coming to this planet for a long time. We've never been alone. We're part of it. We're just not being let in on it, for various reasons. We are not supposed to know who we are, how we got here, and who's really running the show. The level of technology on this planet is far greater than anybody here is allowed to know, and it's been that way for forever, ever since they showed up here and colonized this world and began an experiment. I think originally it was benevolent, and then it was hijacked, and it became a very malevolent situation, which we're still suffering from or under. So in essence, we are part of an evil empire. We're subjects of an empire that, in my opinion, is illegitimate, a rebel empire. And it's headed by what most people in this audience would be familiar with the name Enki. I know you've had other people talking about this entity as a good guy. He's also known as Lucifer. He's also known as Loki. He's also known as Ptah, Poseidon, and the list goes on. But he is the father of modern mankind as we know ourselves to be. And I don't know if you've looked at us lately, but we are a mess. And I attribute that to him, not his brother, Enlil, Michael, whatever you want to call him. His brother is not the bad guy. Okay, the victor always writes history, and in this case, it was Enki who wrote our history. He considers himself to be the father of us. He also considers himself to be the savior of mankind because he allegedly saved us, or a portion of us, after the flood that he claims that his parents created to wipe us all out. Now, the real reason that his family wanted to wipe all life off this planet is because Enki, the mad scientist, had created monsters, literally monsters on this planet, genetic freaks in laboratories that he then released, much like we see that is happening again now with CRISPR. If you don't know what I'm talking about, folks, look it up. CRISPR. And it is genetic editing. We shouldn't be doing this, but we are. We shouldn't be creating artificial intelligence to compete with us and control us, but we are. But why are we doing this? Well, in my opinion, again, Enki and his minions are controlling us, and they have been doing so ever since they took over here over 200,000 years ago. They illegitimately took over. And this was part of a civil war that he started. Not his brother, it was him. So, again, this is not something that I say lightly. I know it upsets people, and I'm sorry, okay? But from my opinion, after 31 years of experience and research in this field, specifically what I'm talking about now, okay? Because honestly, this was not easy for me. It's still not to talk about. But I have to explain this to people based on what I've learned the hard way, really the hard way. Because I've met Enki, and I didn't know who he was at the time. Okay, I really thought he was, well, he is a god. I thought he may have even been the god of this universe, because he said to me he was the father. Okay, I'm not a Christian. I don't have a religion specifically.
Let me jump in for a second if I
Go
can,
ahead.
Robert. How did you meet him? Give us as many details as you can in this. Walk us through this experience, and put us there.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, I've told this story quite a few times, and I'm sure some people in your audience have already heard it, but I'll try and summarize it this way, that in 1985, September 21st, I was a security guard in Malibu on a very exclusive private beach for extremely wealthy people. A lot of them were Hollywood people. Um, that particular day, a young boy, I'm guessing around 10, maybe younger, he ran face first into a sliding glass door and cut his face and his head so badly he was bleeding to death. And so I rushed over to the house and I called the paramedics. And while I was there, I was speaking with his grandmother, and she was telling me some things about him. And I got the distinct impression that the boy was hearing voices. Now, I was 25 years old at the time, and I didn't know anything about schizophrenia or possession. I think they're related. It's just different names for the same thing, depending on a person's paradigm. So at that time, I also saw entities in the room that were other dimensional. They looked like parasites to me, like ticks, and they were floating up in the ceiling, much like if you imagine these lights above me were dark and they were floating a little lower. That's what it looked like. They were in the room. I only saw them briefly, and I think that was unintentional. It was because I was in an altered state because of the trauma, not to me, but because of the blood and the glass and just the shock of it all caused me to have an altered state of perception. And the unintended consequence of all that was, after the ambulance left and I left the house, I felt like I was being attacked. And at some point, I surmised that if those parasites that I saw briefly in the room were real, that they were now attacking me. I mean, this was all intuitive at the time. I knew a little bit about metaphysics. Clearly, I'd studied religion. My father had been a minister before I was born, so we had plenty of books about religion. Not that I'm religious, but I study religion, philosophy. I don't participate in any of that stuff, by the way. I want to be really clear with you. I do not participate in politics or religion or philosophy, by the way. There's no point in debating any of those things with anybody. And it's more importantly, I don't adhere to any one of those things because I feel it's a trap. It's the only way I've been able to navigate through some of this information and still remain open to new information. Okay, because I know we're being lied to. I could just feel it, and that all the answers that I was seeking, it took me decades to even come to a point where I feel comfortable now even discussing it. And even so, tomorrow I could wake up and with new information, I could change my mind based on that new information. I'm free to do that. Okay. Just wanted to preface this. Okay. So what happened to me in 1985 was groundbreaking, but it was foundational in the sense that when I left that house, I felt I was under attack. So I ended up going on top of a mountain that night, which was an equinox. And that particular equinox, there was a full moon rising just as the sun was setting. So I was literally in between those two energies. And I was all alone in this wilderness area on top of the mountain. And I felt that I needed to do something to help myself. I wasn't sure what it would be, but it ended up being this. I sat on the ground and I began to meditate, but I was also feeling I needed to be more proactive. I didn't want to just clear my mind. That didn't seem to be enough to me. So I knew a bit about Kriya Yoga. So I thought I would try saying Om, but I was doing it in a very unusual fashion. I was literally placing my tongue against the roof of my mouth. And as I would say, Om, I was opening and closing my mouth, say this, with my tongue pressed against the roof of the mouth. It was literally vibrating my entire head. And I did this for quite a while. And as I was doing this, I started to hear the overtones, and I could literally feel it. It was coming through my entire body at this point. And I thought, okay, I'm broadcasting a signal. I should put something on top of that, right? Much like we're doing now, right? We're putting signals out with messages.
Right.
Okay, so I at the time I thought, well, what I saw, what I experienced at the beach that earlier that day was evil. And so I figured, well, what's the opposite of evil? Is love. I mean, that was my rationale at the moment. So I thought, okay, I'm going to focus on one thing, love. And as I'm doing this, as I'm saying this, that's all I was focused on. I just kept repeating that thought in my mind, love, loving thoughts, love, love, love. And I was hoping that somebody out in the Milky Way would pick up on that because I felt I needed help. And as I said, I'm not religious, so I didn't pray to a deity. I was just asking for help, and the prefacing it or the context was love. So much like an SOS. And at some point I got very tired. I ended up laying down on a nearby ruins of an abandoned radar facility that the military had built during the Cold War for the Nike system. And I lay down on this cement, and my face was shielded from the full moon. But as I was laying there, I felt myself. You ever had that feeling like you're falling asleep? You feel yourself, and normally you catch yourself.
Oh yeah.
From that, right? It's because it's an instant reflex, like, oh my God, you just catch yourself and you stop that falling feeling. What it is the body, the soul is, or some part of our spirit is literally separating up. It's moving up, and it feels like this is falling down. It's just an oddity, but that's what part of the out of body experience is.
Like the beginning of an OBE. Mm-hmm.
It really was. Well, I didn't fight it. At that point, I was very tired and I needed whatever. And I was lying on this cement, but I just floated out of my body. I didn't fight it at all. That feeling, I just like, well, okay. And I just went. And I was in another dimension of light. That's all I could see. Everything was light. And I felt safe there. And I thought, okay, wow. Mission accomplished, because I don't think these parasites can follow me here, or whatever these things are. I just felt safe there, and but I was totally awake. Okay, I want people to understand I wasn't sleeping. I had just laid down. I was on cement. I wasn't dreaming this. It was an out of body experience, and I was fully aware of what was happening to me. And I wasn't there very long when I noticed some motion off in the distance, and that got my attention because remember what I said, I'm laying on a cement slab in the wilderness at night by myself, which
Right.
is probably not the smartest thing to do because there are predatory animals up there, such as mountain lions and coyotes. And one night I actually saw a wolf up there. I know people are going to say I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. You weren't, nobody else was there. I saw it. It was a wolf. And it was big. It was way bigger than a German Shepherd. I'm familiar with dogs. I love them. But let me tell you, when you see a wolf at night and you're alone, it is scary. It is scary. It wasn't even interested in me, but let me tell you, I was freaking out. Anyway, that night in this dimension of light, um, uh, here comes something towards me, right? So now, of course, now all my attention's on this thing, whatever it is. And as it got closer to me, I saw that it was a man in a robe, not a bathrobe, like a toga type of thing. And he had long hair and a beard. He looked like Jesus. All right. What we think of as Jesus could have, or anybody from that period of time, right? That's what he looked like, except he was glowing brighter than the light we were in. Now that really got my attention. You cannot ignore somebody like that, especially when they come up right into your face, obviously, and stand in front of you or whatever, literally confront you face to face. And and the other thing was weird is there was light literally coming even out of his eyes. That seemed bizarre, to say the least. So my natural thought was, who is that? You know, I mean, I wasn't expecting him. I didn't even. I was. Just, it was just a thought. You know, like, whoa, who is that? And he says, or somehow projected to me, I am the Father. I was like, okay, that made no sense to me whatsoever, honestly, especially at that moment. I didn't know what he was talking about. I was more like blown away by his appearance, you know, and father of what? I mean, honestly, it was like, and then he started laughing. And for many years, I used to tell people publicly about this and say, but it wasn't sinister, when in fact it was. It was extremely sinister. And it scared me actually. And I woke up, excuse me, I sat up. I sat bolt upright, thinking that was, wow, that was a weird, whatever that was weird. All right. And I thought maybe a minute had passed, maybe. But as I stood up, I looked out on the horizon and now the moon was setting. Whereas before it had been almost directly overhead when I lay down, and I freaked out. I absolutely freaked out. I I couldn't understand it. I still have a hard time with this because I went from being 100% lucid, having this weird encounter with this being of light, while my body is resting on a cement slab, you know, and suddenly like hours have gone by and I have no memory whatsoever. That made no sense to me at all. Uh, so in any case, when the sun came up, now I'd gone through something that was a weird initiative ritual, something. I mean, to say the least. Okay, most people would never go up and sit on a mountain by themselves all night
Right.
on an
Definitely
equinox.
eccentric.
I mean, to say the least. Okay, and it was completely unplanned. This was very spontaneous, intuitive thing that I did. Again, I feel like actually looking back on it, that little spot right there actually, like I said, the military picked it for a reason. They used it for many years, and they were actually some other group was using it as they were beaming satellite signals very close by there. They were bouncing it off there up into space. It's a very unusual spot. And people like to, I guess some people like to drive up there in their four-wheel drives and party up there because there's broken beer bottles everywhere, and there was satanic graffiti somebody had put on those cement pillars. I noticed that later. But in any case, I went back to the beach because I had to go to work after the sun came up. And so again, think about it. I came there as the moon was rising, sun was setting. I left as the moon was setting and the sun was rising. So I literally experienced the full spectrum of that light, as well as that other light, whatever that other light is. Okay, I don't know. I'm sure everybody's got their own opinion about it. Believe me, because every time I bring this up to people, everybody's got, and that's fine. I understand it. Okay,
Why do you look? If I can interrupt, Robert,
go ahead. No, please do.
For just a second. Why do you look at that as sinister? You'll probably get to this, but why do you think that was Enki as well?
Yeah, it took me a long time, Rex. I didn't know who he was. I honestly, until 2014, after I started reading the Wes Penray papers. You can either go to wespenray.com. His last name is spelled Penre, Wes Penray, or you can go to my website at unicusmagazine.com and click on library, and you can have access to his papers there and more. His new book, an interview I did with him, articles, etc. He helped me, his work actually helped me come to the realization of who I'd been dealing with as the father for all those years. But let me finish here, okay? Because I got to explain this to you. After I came down off the mountain and I went back to work, I was very concerned about that boy. Even though I didn't know these people, the whole thing was very traumatic. And because I'm a healthy human being and I'm empathic rather than sociopathic, I felt emotionally connected to this event. And so I went over there and I spoke to the grandparents, and they said that the boy, he lived. He had lost a lot of blood. He had to have over 300 stitches in his face and head. So it was a life-threatening situation, trust me. The guy, I'm really surprised he made it, but hey, I'm glad he did. And as they told me this, I said to them, you can heal the scars on his face, but unless you heal the scars on his soul, this will happen again. And as I said it, I was like, why did I say that? That was not a good thing to say to these people. And they didn't respond. I didn't say anything else. I just walked away. Walked out of the house, and I thought, okay, this has gone from weird to even weirder. None of this is making any sense. I don't know what's going on here, but it's really, really strange. I was actually concerned I was going to get fired for doing that, even though I helped save their grandson. Now I'm telling them stuff that is just, I don't even know why I'm saying it. So I'm sitting there at my security post, and this girl comes up to me, and she says, a friend of my girlfriend at the time, she says, Robert, I saw you in my dream last night, and you taught me how to fly. And I'm like, okay. And at that point, I was really tired and confused. I just like, and so what? And she says, well, it was interesting. You took me up to the mountains and taught me how to fly. And I'm like, what? What did you say? Oh, yeah, you took me up to the mountains. Now, you got to understand that she lived I'm on the beach. She lived on the other side of the mountains in the valley. She's telling me that I came and got her and took her up to the mountains. That's where I was that night. Okay. That's where I didn't tell her that. She just was telling me, you came to my room, got me like Peter Pan. She says, you took me out the window and we went up to the mountains and you taught me how to fly. And then we came back to my house and you made sure I was safe and made sure I was back in my bedroom, and you left.
That's pretty cool.
I was like, okay, now, okay, I'm glad you told me that, but I am really now I'm starting to worry. What the hell is this all about? This is in other words, somebody's upping the level of strangeness here. Like, well, no, because I'm thinking, wait a second, is that what I was doing all those hours? But that would not account for all the hours. I mean, I must have been out of my body for at least 3-4 hours. That doesn't. Okay, maybe that was one thing that I was doing. So after work, I go home and my grandmother calls me, and she says, Robbie, I saw you at the foot of my bed last night. It was the most amazing dream I've ever had. She said, You were standing there, and there was all these sparkling lights around you like a Christmas tree. And she says, and you were telling me something, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it was. She says, it was just, I just had to tell you. It was the most beautiful dream. And now I'm about ready to pass out. Honestly, I'm just like, whoa, okay, this has what? No, I mean, there was no room for denial there. There was, I mean, there, everything was like, okay, Robert, this is real. Now, how do you reconcile this? What is the context for this? Right?
Hmm.
Who is that? Who was that guy? What were those things in the room? Why did you say that to that kid's grandparents? In retrospect, all these years later, I think that when I was okay, so the girl was over here to the south of my position in the mountains. My grandmother was literally to the north of me, where I was on this mountaintop. So I must have gone, visited this girl, visited my grandmother. That's only two people, and I guarantee that didn't take me 3 hours. So where else might I have gone that night if I had the ability in my spirit body, or whatever you want to call it? I think I would have checked on the boy, just like I did the next day physically. I think I would have. I didn't get to see him, not that I wanted to. I just wanted to know if he was still alive. And so I think I was able to project myself to whatever hospital he was. There isn't any in Malibu. They don't have them. They never have. I don't think they ever will, just like they're not going to have any cemeteries there. I don't know why, but anyway. I think I saw the boy in that other dimension of reality, that other state of being. And I think that I must have seen those scars on his energy body from the parasites that were feeding off of him. So that's the preface. I know this is a long way of saying that's what motivated me to start studying this, and I mean really in depth, because I wanted to know what these things were, and I didn't have the luxury of denying that they exist, obviously. And it wasn't easy. It's been a very steep learning curve. These things do not want to be known. They prefer to be covert. Now, the Gnostics called these things archons.
I was just going to ask you that. It sounds like
Yes,
archon larva.
right. But now, so John Lash talks about this. He claims he's an expert, or whatever a mythologist may be. But the Gnostic, let's be clear here. The Nag Hammadi texts are a fraction of what the Gnostics had available to them through the Hermetic writings. I know you've discussed this with other guests. So there was an immense library of this information at Alexandria. That's why it was burned, just like the Maya had their libraries of codexes burned. It was all done by the archons as they influence various people here to do their bidding. Whether they're aware of it or not, we're all, basically pawns of these entities. Now, they describe them not only as reptilian, but they also describe them as looking like an embryo, which I have on my article section. And, you can see this in my first article. It was called Meet the Archons. And these things that I saw actually did look like either an embryo or an amoeba, more closely resembling an amoeba, which actually is a parasite. And now, Mr. Lash has said that the grays are what the Gnostics were talking about. That's his interpretation. I disagree.
Can I jump in real quick as well?
Go ahead.
Because you're hitting
Please.
on some real powerful stuff here, Robert, and I think that more people need to be aware of the Nag Hammadi treaties. I've actually got a copy right in front of me, and I've been researching this since 2011. I actually had an opportunity to speak with John Lass back in the day, and I don't think he does interviews anymore, which is unfortunate. Great guy when I spoke with him, and I made sure to do my homework before I talked to him because I knew how much research he had into the Nag Hammadi. And the Archons talk about Yaldabaoth being the first. I've read the Secret Book of John multiple times. And then I just read, I can't remember, the same book where it talks about how demons actually built humans. And it talks about the 365 demons and the seven different archetypes. And that reminds me of the 7 days of the week, 365 days of the year. But archons. So you don't think the archons are the Anunnaki?
I didn't say that. Look, this is a really tangled issue. Intentionally, they don't want us to know who they are or what they're doing to us or why. The bottom line is that they feed off of the negative energy that's emitted through us, through our DNA, when we hurt ourselves or others through violent or traumatic act or acts. That's why that boy did what he did. He was hearing voices. He was hearing uh, look, this is not my theory. I learned this the hard way. I had to do a lot of, I mean, literally decades of research to come to this awareness where I can articulate this to you and your audience. And I'm not asking people to believe me. You shouldn't take my word. You shouldn't take anybody's word for it. But I know this from experience as well as years of research. And I want people to understand too that I'm a professional. Okay, that's what I did for Honda Research and Development for 8 years. I worked as a journalist. I literally took a lot of time to learn on the job how to do this professionally. So it's not like there's a lot of people on YouTube that are very good at what they do, but they don't have a journalistic standard. All they're doing is punditry. They're expressing opinion, and everybody has one. That's great. Doesn't mean it doesn't mean that it's accurate though. This is a problem we have here. So anyway, these parasites are something that I outline in very clearly in an article called "The Birth of the Archons." When they came from somewhere, okay? Now, I don't think the benevolent creator of this universe and all life in it would create a parasite like that would screw things up because everything is consciousness. What do I mean by that? We know that energy and matter are the same thing. It turns out there's a new model. It's new here on this earth. It's called digital physics. And what it states is that consciousness is primary. In fact, consciousness, energy, and matter are all the same thing. They're all wavelengths that are being propagated by something. Okay, that something would be, I think, loosely what we would call a soul, your spirit, your immortal self. In any case, energy and matter are the lower spectrum. Consciousness is the highest frequency. Energy is slightly lower. Matter is slightly lower. It's like a drop of water. It can be a solid, a liquid, or a gas depending on its vibratory rate. The same is true for consciousness. So all this is a construct, basically. We are a construct. Now, these parasites were manifested by Enki, Lucifer, accidentally, according to a book that was written by a friend of my dad. His name is Norman Paulson. And I know he's a controversial figure, okay? He wasn't close friends with my dad, but they both studied under Paramahansa Yogananda back in the 50s. That's where they met. And they were down at the ashram in Encinitas before it fell into the sea and was rebuilt. Okay, so my dad knows these people, but he's not interested in this stuff. It's really not about my biological dad. It's more about our spiritual father, Enki. It turns out Enki is the father of the archons. And this is outlined in the book, or at least part of the book, by Norman Paulson called Sunburst Return of the Ancients. That was the original name. Now it's called Christ Consciousness. Again, you can read that excerpt on my website in the articles section under The Birth of the Archons. And what it states is this information allegedly came from benevolent human extraterrestrials that had contacted Norman back in the 50s and told him that Lucifer had gone insane. The reason he fell from grace or heaven, or however you want to look at it from a religious standpoint, was not because of his ego or his pride, but he had gone mad. He and his crew entered a forbidden zone. Let's just call it a black hole because I don't know what else. There isn't any details, but it was off limits to biological life because it would be dangerous to them. Well, as a god, a builder of worlds, Enki, Lucifer, felt that he would be immune to any kind of side effects or energy in that zone. So he went in there. And he was so badly traumatized, he and his crew, that their thoughts were fragmented, shattered. And he literally suffered multiple personality disorder or disassociated. And so did his crew. And they also inadvertently created these thought forms, which are the mental parasites that some people are now referring to as demons or archons or jinn, you name it. In fact, I found that pretty much every culture on the planet has a name for these things, but they're all describing the same thing. So now the Anunnaki or the Chitahuri or whatever you want to call them are essentially Enki's empire. My understanding after reading Wes Penray's papers, which are not perfect, okay, I admit, I feel I can't agree with everything that he has come. In fact, he even admits his first paper is not as well researched as the second paper or the third or the fourth or the fifth, okay? He doesn't make excuses. He just says, look, I'm learning, okay? Here's my first level of learning. Here's my second level of learning. And here's my third. It's all free, okay? It's there.
Can I jump in real quick on that as well? Just one question about it. Was it all just, I guess I should, like, was all this information in those books summoned or not summoned, but given to him from these extraterrestrials, essentially?
No, absolutely not. He's had very limited contact. No, he's done the research the hard way from here on the ground. Entities are not giving him channeled information, which, by the way, I find is a load of crap.
Okay.
I think it's another way that people are being manipulated by these entities. It's the same reason why they didn't stop, get out, and give a press conference on July 16, 2002, or better yet, back in July of 1952. They could have easily given a press conference and cleared this whole matter up. It's their fault we don't have disclosure. It's their fault we don't have any kind of unity here. I mean, really, their whole thing is about divide and conquer. I told you they need to feed off of us. They went from being builders of worlds to being destroyers of worlds. They also went from being coherent, singular souls to this fragmented, multiple personality disorder, dissociative entities that are self-infected by these mental parasites. They literally are parasitic, predatory entities. In essence, this is what I got to summarize it this way. Evil is an infection. It's an anomaly, okay? It's not a learning experience, unless you think like cancer is a learning experience or AIDS. I mean, it's an illness. It needs to be cured, all right? That's all it is. And I'll give you an example. It has everything to do with consciousness, by the way. Again, I'm going back to this. If you look at a dog, which I dearly love, but if your family pet contracts rabies, it no longer listens to you. It's no longer a loving part of your family. It wants to attack you, okay? That's what happened to Enki and his crew. And after they somehow managed to get out of that forbidden zone, they went on a rampage that's ongoing to this day. That's my understanding of it. That's the way I'm presenting it to people. And again, I don't really enjoy doing this, but I think we have a right to know. I think we have a need to know, because people will never solve a problem unless they know that they have one, right? I mean, why would you go see a doctor unless you thought you found like a lump or something, right? It's like, what's the point? So and by the way, this is affecting everybody to some degree, not just a few people. This, I mean, like, look, the chief exorcist for the Vatican died recently, of old age, all right? Not like Father Malachi Martin was killed because he was telling too much to the public. He was not, and it wasn't by the Vatican, I don't think. It was by these archonic entities. He was outing them, okay? Because he said they're in the Vatican, okay? But the chief exorcist for the Vatican, Father Gabriel Amorth, said that exorcisms were on the rise. By the time he passed away at the age of 90, he'd already performed, he claims, over 70,000 exorcisms, Okay, so my question is, if they are doing that, if they're training more exorcists, if they're doing literally recently in Mexico, they did an exorcism for the whole country. I don't think that worked, but they're desperate. They're desperately trying to do something to counteract the activities of these parasites. Personally, I don't think it's working.
Have you heard of Mauro Bellino?
No.
Mauro Bellino wrote a book called The Book That Will Forever Change the Way You Look at the Bible. He's written several books, and he was actually a Vatican translator for many years, and he's got some great credentials. He's lives in Italy, and he said essentially, if you read that book, he took apart the Hebrew language and he deciphered it literally from the core of the Hebrew language, as he explains. And it correlates strongly with Gerald Clark in regards to the Anunnaki, and the Old Testament really talks about ancient aliens creating humans, etc. So it sounds to me like, but what you're talking about is very similar to what Gerald Clark and Mauro Bellino say, as well as Zachariah Sitchin, except for the Enki Enlil. What do you think about what I just said about Mauro Bellino also working for the Vatican for many years, coming out saying virtually very similar things to what we're talking about here?
Yes, the Vatican knows at the highest level. So does the UN. They're very aware of how we got here and who's really in charge. And at some point in our lifetimes, Rex, we are going to see a return of the gods. And the UN and the Vatican are preparing for that. Actually, they've been preparing for some time for that transition point where they're no longer in hiding. They come back and they take overt roles in our lives again. But that isn't without a price. They are not benevolent. The ones that run the show here, dog and pony show, are malevolent. In fact, I would go one step further. They're psychopathic. And this AI business, the transhumanist movement, the transgender movement, is all part of their agenda. And this is something that Wes Penray is exclusively talking about in terms that I appreciate, in the fact that he is being open from what he has concluded based on his analysis of his research. That the Luciferian agenda under Enki is that artificial intelligence will be running the show here, that we will be transfigured into something hardly recognizable. In other words, cyborg, much like the Greys are now, or have been for some time. And the reason that they are going to upgrade us, and I being facetious when I say that, is to serve their agenda, which is to ultimately defeat or end the civil war that Enki started with his family in the Orion court a long time ago, when they denied him kingship because he had gone mad, not because of his ego, but because his mental state. He literally went insane. He became rabid and was unfit to be the king of the empire, to take the Enlilship. By the way, Enlil is not a name, it's a title. So is Enki, or Lucifer is a title, just means the light bearer. Most of these entities that we already have various names for them, right? Based on our culture and the time: alien, Chitauri, Anunnaki, Illuminati, Grigori, whatever. It's all the same entities. But they're not coming from a particular planet. They have an empire. He has created a rebel empire when he started a civil war, because when they said no, his parents told him, no, you cannot be the king of the Orion Empire. He said, well, screw you. I will start my own empire. And that's where the war in heavens began. So this is not a small thing, okay? I mean, what I'm describing here is very complicated, but it's not incomprehensible if you put it in the proper context. And I think that's what's lacking here. For a lot of the conversations I hear on the internet, and that's where most of this is going on, because we still have the freedom to express our thoughts, for now anyway. But that's going to rapidly go away as people become part of the singularity, as they enhance themselves by linking up to the collective brain, the artificial intelligence that they have already created, that they just aren't, they're not telling us all the stuff that they have, okay?
Well, Robert, let me jump in real quick. I'm glad you
Go
brought
ahead.
this up because this is really correlating a lot with a podcast that I did just a few days ago on the way supercomputers now are just every 3 or 4 years, they don't just double in speed, they quadruple. And this is just in the silicon chip level, like the new
Yes.
93 petaflop computer that's out there. In a few years, IBM in 2017, actually next year, I should say, IBM's coming out with a 300 petaflop. And then you've got the quantum computers, which are even faster than that. You've got DNA computers. Where I'm going with this is the chemtrail blasts and all the stuff they're spraying in the atmosphere combined with who knows what they're putting in the food, certain vaccines and other type of medications, etc. Could there be like these nano particulates or
Bots.
nanobots essentially? Yeah, let's just
Yes.
call them what it is, nano gremlins, literally. Could they be inside of people right now and like literally
Yes.
rewriting the cerebral cortex and stuff?
Yes. Just like we have these external parasite entities, the Archon entities that I saw, I'm not the only one who's seen these things, okay? The Gnostic shamans saw these in when they were in an altered state. That's how they got a lot of that information. But what I saw, all of this is an extension of that. It's parasitic, it's psychopathic. All these AI, they claim they're going to give them emotion. I doubt it. I really doubt it. And besides that, even if they did, some of them may have that, and some of them may have rules that are prohibit them from harming us. But there's already lethal autonomous weapon systems that DARPA created to go and essentially kill human beings. So it's out there. I mean, there's nothing to stop a psychopath or so-called terrorist from creating one of these killing machines, an artificial intelligence killing machine. So, but now the nanobots are interesting because that's something that's been put into us against our will, without our consent, for our own good. This is interesting how the way they sell this to us is, or I should say, those pilots and those scientists that put the chemtrails together were lied to. They were convinced that what they were doing was actually for the good of mankind when it's the opposite. In fact, a lot of what we do, like say nuclear weapons, right? We were told that that was actually going to help us protect ourselves from our alleged enemies, who are actually us.
Yeah,
Okay,
nuclear weapons are peaceful.
it's to secure the peace against your enemy is the guy across the street. Well, wait a minute, no, I'm related to him. We're all part of the same species. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay.
This one thinks
Again,
for himself.
well, yes, I know. I've heard your analogies to "they live." That's very interesting. It's actually quite true. But now the artificial intelligence, as you've talked with others, is based not so much on the processing power as it is on the connectivity of a neural net. So the other thing that I don't think you've quite come to the realization is that that part of the sensing process that they will do is light. It's not just I mean the full spectrum, not this little narrow thing that we're stuck in, as you well know, I know I listen to some of your stuff, okay? I know you're aware of this. But we only see and hear this much of what we already are. Scientifically, we can say, look, there's this much energy / information around us all the time in this band width. We only get to see and hear this much. That was done deliberately to us. In other words, our connectivity is on dial-up. One of your friends called us meat modems. Okay, I'll accept that. We're stuck. Most of us are stuck on dial-up, and that was done to us intentionally. Some of us occasionally have these breakthrough glimpses of whatever, and we suddenly go from dial-up to broadband, and we freak out because they're like, whoa, wait a second, wait a minute, that's too much information. Where'd that come from? What does it all mean? And it's a bit of an overload, right? And it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it obviously it has happened to a lot of people, including myself, and that's why I do what I do. But it's very disturbing at the same time. And my understanding is the reason that the benevolent ones don't come in and intervene on our behalf is because first of all, we haven't asked for it. In fact, we've agreed to do things that are detrimental to our own well-being. We've agreed to it. The analogy, the metaphor for that is Eve eating the apple. Okay, right. And we know who tricked her into doing that. But that was for our own good, though, right? It made us smarter. No, it taught us how to be evil and good. Or I should say, we learned how to be at that point. Again, that's a metaphor. I don't think it was an apple, all right? But it's part of the storyline. It's so-called original sin. I it's way more complicated than that, in my opinion. But it's 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 a perfect analogy for what I'm trying to tell you here. That wasn't the only time. It wasn't the first or the last time we agreed to participate with Enki's agenda. He's very good at manipulating. He did it to me for decades. I was under the false pretense that he was actually there to help me. I didn't realize until almost 30 years later that he was the one that created the parasites that were attacking the boy, causing him to almost kill himself. The reason that was going on, it wasn't random. It's not entertainment. It's food. Okay, the metaphor for that is the Matrix, the movies that they showed us. Like,
Well,
we are batteries. We're batteries for these machines. Look, they use machines for a reason. Enki created those machines as an extension of himself because he had lost his ability to create as a god with just his consciousness. His consciousness is broken. It's not well. He's not well. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with somebody that's schizophrenic or multiple personality? They're incoherent. Maybe for a moment you get some clarity, you know, and then there's all this internal conflict going on between the various entities or voices in that one person. So he can't focus long enough to create consciousness, or I should create using his consciousness. So what he does is he manipulates things that have already been manifested by other gods.
now, who's Thoth to you?
Why do you ask?
Well, because there's people that say Thoth is a part of Enki, and then there's others that think Thoth is a part of the other side of the coin.
I don't want to comment. I personally don't want to comment on him because he is out of bounds. His work is, think about what I said. His work was destroyed here. His thousands of books that you talk about, over 30,000 books he wrote, I think there's still copies underneath the Great Pyramid in what we would now call, similarly look like CDs. But the Maya Codex had his information, and those were all destroyed. The Library at Alexandria had a lot of his information, and it was destroyed. So who do you think's doing that? Based on what I'm telling you. Now look, when I was 15 years old, 1975, I was in Egypt. I've traveled at that point. I spent like 2 years when I was a teenager traveling. I went to 57 countries, which is very unusual. And the last place that I visited was Egypt before I sailed back to Los Angeles. I did this all on cruise ships with my parents. It's really weird. We were actually working on the cruise ships. My parents, my dad he was an artist. He was teaching people how to paint. He was selling his paintings. My mom was a concert pianist. So
That's a pretty cool lifestyle for a while.
It was
for a short while.
Well, yeah, it was highly unusual in the sense that it broke me away from my peer group. And it was probably a good thing. Again, I think it shaped me to be an independent thinker. I didn't fall into any clique. I still don't. I'm not a joiner, okay? I don't have groupthink syndrome. But in any case, so when we're in Egypt, we go to the Great Pyramid. My parents said, "We'll wait here. You go in." I'm like, "Okay, really? Oh, fine, whatever." I go in there. I go to the Queen's Chamber, so-called, and spend some time there alone. Then I go up the Grand Gallery into the King's Chamber. There was a tour group in there. As I entered, there was a tour guide, a local man wearing the local garb, the white robe. He struck that stone box, so-called sarcophagus or a coffer, He hit that with a wooden mallet, and it rang like a tuning fork in that room. Now, at the time, I've been playing a lot of music. As I told you, my mom was a concert pianist. I was actually a violinist. Can you imagine? Hey.
Nice.
in classical sitting. I never got to sit first chair. I was never that good at it. I didn't really like the violin. I was more like attracted to guitars. You can see my guitars. But anyway,
Those are nice.
yeah, those are just some of it I brought to Hong Kong. So, but I have an ear for music. Okay. And I mean, you have to, if you sit in an orchestra, you have to listen to everybody else, what they're doing. And growing up with my mom playing concert, piano, it's like my ears are trained to certain pitch and movement of music because it does move. The waves move. And so as I'm standing there and he did this, I was totally caught off guard by that. And I was listening to this, I think it was an F flat. Anyway, it was spiraling around the room. It was the weirdest thing I've ever heard, still to this day. And I'm listening to this thing just like completely like a deer in the headlights. And suddenly I had a whiteout. That's the way I called it, okay? I didn't realize it was an out-of-body experience. But like I said, like what happened to me 10 years later, suddenly, my eyes were wide open, by the way. I was completely awake, but suddenly everything just went white. And then the next thing I know, I felt like I was outside the pyramid, which was shocking to say the least. And even more shocking is that there were Egyptian deities standing there. And you can imagine one of them was Thoth. And I had no contact with these beings. I just saw them and thought to myself, this is freaking bizarre. And the next thing I knew, I was back in my body and my vision was coming back and my hearing was really strange. I had like a hissing sound in my ears. Really bad. I mean, like, you know how the TV is when it has no signal, just kind of that white noise that
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
that was going on in my ears.
That's fascinating.
So it was bizarre, man. Let me tell you, that was just some kind of bizarre initiation. I don't think that's what the pyramid was originally intended for, but it's something they do. And afterwards I walked up to the tour guide and he didn't speak much English. And I asked him, why did you do that? What was that all about? And when I looked at the faces of the people around, and the whole room was packed, I don't know how many of those other people actually had out-of-body experiences or not. I'm guessing not many because they didn't react. They didn't react, to it. I'm not even sure the tour guide knows why he was doing that, other than it's like, hey, here's a neat trick. Let me show you what this does. Like, what? So.
Now, if I can ask too, the emerald tablets, I'm trying to find out where the origin is, like the oldest copy, so that way I can put some type of date on it, because there's so much good information in the emerald tablets, and a lot of people can read it and say, this stuff is way ahead of its time, because it is. But yet, maybe there's mystery schools or people out there, obviously, that have esoteric knowledge and information that's way ahead of its time, even like certain programs today. And you look at the defense contractors and some of these guys out there that have technologies that are just way beyond. But do you have any information on where the original documents are, or clay tablets or bronze statues, or just something to verify the dates of the emerald tablets?
No. And anybody who tells you that they do, I would be very, very suspicious, because, look, there were two trees in the garden that were off limits to us, humans. The tree of good and evil, or the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, or immortality. That tree is about to be harvested. We are going to be granted immortality through transhumanist technology. That's one of the things that's the bait. You want to compete with AI? Okay, take the chip. Or let's activate those nanobots that are in your bloodstream. If you agree to that, then you could live to be whatever. You'll be smarter, stronger, live longer. Why am I telling you that? Because you need to know. You're going to have to make that. All of us are going to have to make that decision in the near future. Now, the reason they don't give us information about our true history is because the same reason that when slaves were brought from Africa to America, it was illegal to educate them. We are slaves. I'm sorry to say that, but we are servants. We worship or work for Lucifer. This is his world. From a Christian perspective, most people that I know that call themselves Christian agree that Satan is the god of this world. Okay, think about what I'm saying here. If Lucifer Enki told me he was the father, is that the same father that is in the Bible? If so, we've got a real problem here. I know some people are going to argue and say, no, it's Enlil because Zechariah Sitchin said so. I disagree. I met Sitchin once, and I showed him an artifact that was given to me of the belt of Orion, and he just about fell out of his chair. And I didn't know why. But it was Jordan Maxwell that actually put Zechariah Sitchin up to a lot of this stuff, this alternative history. And I hope you see where I'm going with this. We've been lied to, because that's the other name for Enki or Lucifer, is the father of all lies. Think about what I'm telling you here. If a person has multiple personality disorder, they don't even know when they're lying to you. Psychopaths are really good at pretending like they care. They simulate emotion because they have none. They have zero empathy. All right? So, and they're very good at manipulating us. They have to. We're their property. We're not just slaves, I told you. We actually are giving them food or energy. They need it. Robert Monroe talks about this too in his journeys out of body. He claims he met an entity there that said, well, we created you, that you are our food. You give us this energy. And they called it Loosh. I don't think that's the name for it. I don't think that entity is even capable of telling the truth to Robert Monroe or anyone else. This is something you have to understand. These entities do not have our best interest at heart. This is one of the reasons that Lucifer created religion here. So it's just another method for us to be divided and conquer us. We conquer ourselves. We agree to kill each other. Hey, God told me to cut that guy's head off for his own good. Okay. It's not me doing it. God told me to do that. Really? Which God was that? Doesn't matter. All the gods here for the longest time have been.
Sorry,
Go
Robert,
ahead.
I just got to jump in real quick on that.
Please.
Because, I kind of feel like if you look at even the Old Testament, if you read that, where Yahweh, which if Yahweh is Enlil, he tells, I don't know if it's Adam or who he tells basically his people to go kill every man, woman, and child, kill all the livestock. And, they have to do it in this just real barbaric fashion. So I hear people say, well, that's because they were the Nephilim, or that's because they were all bad monsters and they were eating babies. So, and I have so much respect for people that are Christian and other religions. I love you guys. I was raised Christian, but I look at that, and I've always looked at that as genocide, in my opinion.
Let's take it a step further. The Great Flood was genocide.
Yeah.
Why? Okay, from a Christian perspective, we were evil. We had sinned. And therefore, we had to be wiped out and start over. Well, let's see. Whose fault might that have been? Anybody got any answers out there? I mean, it's really very obvious. Here's the problem, though. If a person looks at this as a matter of faith and rejects any kind of fact, they're never going to get to come to any conclusion. I mean, look. What we call facts it's just information. And a lot of it is incorrect, or it simply doesn't apply to whatever the problem is that you're trying to solve. So if you take information and you analyze it That's step one. Then you gather more information and you compare it to this first batch. That's a second level of analysis. Now you're slightly better off, you know. And so it goes. You can never rest on one level and just say, "Oh, here's the answer. I've got it. I'm comfortable with that. Forget all this other stuff. It doesn't fit. So I'm just going to ignore all this stuff over here, and I'm going to stick with this on level one. I'm good with that." That's where a lot of people study. It's called cognitive dissonance. People just, the other thing people have a problem here, and I think this was induced in us, is the Stockholm syndrome. Not only are we looking for someone to save us, but even when a hideous bad person, a psychopath comes along, we are conditioned to relate to them as offering us some sort of salvation. It's programming, okay? They did that. That's not only did they shut off certain things in our DNA, but they modified us to behave a certain way that's beneficial to their agenda. So I have no problem with people that are religious. I have a problem with the process. I think it's inadequate to say the least, okay? And it's also very divisive, however you want to say that. And that's done intentionally to keep us divided and conquered. And the next phase that we're going into, one of the reasons I've been very vocal about this, speaking publicly, is because they're going to fool a lot of people again in the near future. The return of the gods, thanks to, with the blessings of the Vatican and the UN, they are going to establish this truly a new world order based on the old stuff. It's not new at all. It's just the next level. So the so-called secret space program, super soldiers, transhumanism, all this is connected. A lot of the stuff that we're being told is nonsense, but that's just, they don't want us to know everything. They really don't want us to know. And more importantly, they don't want us to unite against them. I mean, individually, we can take a stand and say, hey, screw off. I don't want to participate in this. I'm a sovereign soul. You have no right to interfere with my path. And they have to respect that. Otherwise, there's serious consequences, and they know it. But most of us here don't realize that because we're not allowed to know that. Okay, and we're so busy being distracted or pointing fingers. It's really tough. Okay, I understand. Look, I'm here too. I'm living through this, just like everybody else. But I'm actually very optimistic. And despite everything I've told you here today, I'm an incredibly optimistic person. I'm actually a very positive, loving person. And it's because I know there are divine ones that still exist. I should say they're healthy. They're benevolent. They're not ill. They're not rabid. And they do exist. It's very difficult for them to come here. And actually that's how we started off a long time ago. The benevolent ones that put us here, this was a really beautiful experiment that they were doing. And it should have been the blueprint for the rest of this particular universe, of which there are an infinite number, in my opinion. But because it's growing, it's organic, okay? It's a holographic fractal. We are seeds of light in a garden. And our growth has been interrupted by this illness. And it's a tragedy. It's not a learning experience that was planned for as though we somehow needed it. Okay, that's just, and again, this is my opinion based on a lot of research. It's a well-educated opinion, people. I mean, again, I don't expect you to just take my word for it. And I know what I'm saying is alternative, truly alternative to a lot of the narrative that people are out there discussing or trying to say is correct. I don't think we know. I don't think we're allowed to know the truth, and that is by design, so that we are more easily manipulated and divided and ultimately servile. We are servants. We are subjects of an empire, an illegitimate, evil, rebel empire. And that's why we're not getting disclosure. That's why people go missing too, by the way. It's not, the few people that are abducted, it's relatively speaking, percentage wise, the few people that are abducted and returned, like Mr. Allen, who has an implant, just like his
Mm-hmm.
brother, works at
Mm-hmm.
the Pentagon. He works at the Pentagon, people. You understand me? There's people in the Pentagon that have been abducted and implanted. They can't help you. They can't help themselves. So who are you going to call? It's not me. It's not me.
Well, Daryl used to be a CIA asset, and
Yeah.
he talks about how not only he has had multiple experiences and abductions, but his family members, and that he looks at it like galactic kidnapping, essentially.
It is. It is, unless you look at it from the archontic perspective. We are their property. That's what Charles Fort came to the conclusion. He said, it's like a farm. We're somebody's property. And he was right. Without giving a lot of specifics, he was right. And they don't, yes, they're supposed to get our permission. And actually, on some level, we do agree to it. As I said before, a lot of us suffer from Stockholm syndrome. So when we see the light, we're like, oh, wow, you're here to help. A lot of times they're not. Most of the time they're not. In fact, even when we pass over physically, they're waiting for us to recycle us back into this farm. So this has been going on a long time, and I like Daryl. He's the only person on this planet I've ever permitted to hypnotize me, and it wasn't pleasant. I mean, he wasn't trying to harm me or anything. He's just trying to get information, but it wasn't pleasant at all.
Did he pull
You
out
know,
some old experiences that you had that you didn't remember?
not necessarily. What I got from that was a clear awareness of how traumatized that I had been over the course of my lifetime. But it didn't answer as to why. Look, we're all traumatized to some degree, to various levels, pretty much every day, actually, through whatever, bombarded by chemicals or crazy acts, some kind of stress. And again, this is so that we release this energy so that they can feed, that they can live. They live because essentially we die, only to be reborn again for them. We're a renewable crop, unfortunately. And this has got to end at some point. Again, this is why I'm optimistic. I do feel that there are contingency plans. Part of it is a super wave that some people feel is going to be very destructive or detrimental. I personally feel it's the awakening that we've been working up towards ever since 1987. 87 to 2012 was a very interesting time. The energies were increasing as we came into alignment with the galactic center. But or is it we're on an uprising? Well, whatever it is, some people call it the photon zone. We're there. We're in this energy. NASA knows this. They call it the fluff. It's a weird name. I don't know why do they call it that, but they know that our solar system entered a region of space that is highly excited. They say it's extremely hot. That's why the whole solar system has heated up, and the weather's going crazy. But it's affecting our consciousness as well. If you've ever seen the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton, it's highly instructive in that it teaches that, graphically shows that our cells are receptors to signals that come from external sources for good or ill. And so people are hackable. I hate to say that, and I don't mean like with a machete. I mean that our bioelectric system is bombarded by signals all the time. And the reaction we have to it is either good or not good. So look around and see what's going on here. I mean, typically it's not good. And again, there's a nexus for that. There's an origin for all of this insanity. In my opinion, there has to be. So It doesn't matter. At some point, it's not like I'm trying to create a scapegoat. The illness started anywhere. Whenever you go to get diagnosed by a physician, they have to ask questions as to, okay, when did you first have this symptom? Where were you? What were you doing? This is important to getting an accurate diagnosis. And so far, people, because they don't see this evil has never been considered a secular problem. They say, okay, sorry. Now they call it panerology, psychopathy, or not psychopathy, psychopathic, yeah, psychopathic behavior is something that these are new terms, schizophrenia. It's a chemical imbalance. Yeah, but what triggers the chemicals to cascade? It's an external, non-physical signal. And that's not my opinion, okay? That's a scientific fact. So in the past, our ancestors had a different view of it, but we're still stuck in the same environment. We're having the same issues. We're just using different language and some different means of treating it. But is it effective? Are we solving the problem? Look, if we were, we wouldn't have warfare. We wouldn't have all the conflict and the suffering that we have right now, or the lies that we're being told by our so-called leaders on a daily basis. But as I said, at some point this could end. One of the possibilities is that a wave of consciousness, and I don't think it's hit yet, but I'm not the only person that is saying this, but it's possible that a wave of energy comes washing over the planet and literally reactivates our DNA. Full spectrum. So most people are, meat modems go from dial-up to broadband, maybe even beyond broadband, and it's something we can't even imagine. So instead of only seeing this much, now you're seeing this much. Whoa, okay, that's going to be shocking. That's that's an understatement. If I say shocking, that's not even accurate. It's going to be the most mind-blowing experience ever for people, because suddenly they're going to see things and know things that they just never even had considered. And at that point, though, the way it was presented to me was that we have to make a decision. Do we want to go free? Do we want to go back to the original state of being? Not just here, but in the original universe, not the fake one that Enki created. Or do we want to continue serving Enki and the Archons? And believe it or not, Rex, some people are going to say, oh, I'm comfortable here. I don't want to go into that unknown place. I'm going to stick with this, the psychopaths. They'll take care of me. I know this path. It's like people in prison. They've been there for so long, they get let out. They hate it. They feel uncomfortable. They immediately commit a crime so they can go back in. I didn't make that up, by the way. Okay. It's sad when you think about it, but it's part of the human condition. Okay. As we know ourselves now. However, as I said, I strongly urge people to, if you want to know what's really coming, the page that I put up for Technocide, the Luciferian Agenda, there's over 300 mainstream news articles linked there. Just read the headlines. Okay, I don't expect anybody to read that many articles, but just read the headlines and it will boggle your mind as to what they're telling you that they're doing right now and what's coming. They're not going to tell you why this is all happening now, but it is happening.
You look at the possibilities after death, and I've heard before that the light is somewhat of a trap. It just recycles you, kind of like a bug that goes to the light, all of a sudden zap, and then I've heard that's a trap. No, you want to go to the light. So where do you think you should go after you pass this physical state of existence?
Yeah, Wes Penray talks a lot about this. Again, I find this really unique to his research, and it's acceptable to me. It makes a lot of sense that there's a net or a grid that was an energy field was put around the Earth Moon system in order to keep the souls recycling back again. Of course, there was handlers or managers that would, every time we go into the light, they'd be like appearing as whatever. Let's just say my grandmother says to me, Robbie, oh, you should go back with that family. They're so nice. You'll fit right in there with them. I was like, okay, Granny. And I'm, in the past, I probably would have fallen for that. Yeah, we're attracted to that light. They know it. They know that. Actually, all this light here is a frequency that they created. It's not the original one. We're only like 6% at most of this little fake universe he created is not, it's not even part of, it's a separate little, it's the Matrix. It's a separate part of the entire universe. If this is the entire universe, we're just this little thing over here. Okay. And everything in this fake Matrix is fake. I mean, it's not what we would call the original organic true creation. So, what our scientists call that dark matter, dark energy. We can't see it. We just know it's there. Okay, yeah, you can't see it until you go out of your body and then transit. If you're permitted, you start to go up out of this trap, this prison, and we go, as we transit out in our true state of being, back in, it was like, wait a minute, it's not dark at all. And it's full of life. I mean, wow. We've been fed a bunch of lies. Anyway, so what Wes Penry said was that there is this energy grid around the planet. Recently, scientists discovered this. It's not the Van Allen radiation belts. It's something completely different. When they found it with their instruments, they said, wow, that looks like something out of Star Trek. No idea what it's for, but hey, that's cool. So Wes had said previously, before I sent him that information, that this is a soul trap. Souls can get in, but they can't get out. It's kind of like the Roach Motel. Sorry. But it does. I mean, it works good for them. And so what's been happening, though, between 87 and 2012, and actually now, is that our consciousness, the energy is been increasing so much. Our consciousness, which, as I said before, is energy. The frequency is going up, and some of us are waking up, and some of us are saying, screw this. I don't remember agreeing to being a prisoner, enslaved here. And if I did, that was a mistake, So what's happening is our intent to be free, which is the natural state of our being as seeds of light in this garden, not on this world. I mean, in this universe or the multiverse. We are poking holes in this soul trap. So now it's become more like a grid or a net. And that if a person leaves their body, either through out-of-body experience or through death or near death, they will, if they look for it, if they don't go into the light, they can start to look above, relatively speaking, above. Just keep moving up. Don't go in, go up. You will see this net, energy grid. Look for a hole in the grid and go through it. Use your intention. Just say, I want to see what's on the other side of that. And you'll go. I mean, that's what free will is all about. So anyway, if we get out of that, we have a very good chance, a soul has a very good chance of returning to its origins in the primordial creation, and which is immense. It's nothing like this prison matrix that we live in here, not just on this planet, but this whole solar system is part of a galactic empire that he created. It's fake. It's synthetic.
Well, let me ask a question, because you brought up the Nag Hammadi earlier, and Yaldabaoth is the chief archon in many of the Gnostic texts. So I wanted to get your take on Yaldabaoth. Who is Yaldabaoth?
Enki. Look, in Egypt he's known as Ptah, but to others he was known by various names. These are just, again, most of these are titles. He's known as Ea, E-A, to the Akkadians. It's the water bearer. He's apparently, in his original form, he was amphibanoid, but he has that ability to shapeshift. His avatar is, He's very much in control of the ability, just as his son Marduk, Ra. He does have a son here. In fact, he's the one that's been in charge of this world for some time, because Enki's been busy doing other things within his empire. But I do think he's planning on returning again, just to oversee what's going on, the so-called upgrading of humanity through the singularity, transhumanism. He wants to make sure that all goes smoothly so that we can be his foot soldiers in the next assault, or I should say, hopefully that they're planning the final assault on the Orion Empire, his family's court in the belt of Orion. That's what he's planning. I hope it doesn't come to pass. But anyway, I don't think I answered your question. Yaldabaoth, Enki, all these guys, they use different names, but they're the same entities over time or various cultures. I found when I was living in New England that the Native American leaders actually did this as well. They had multiple names that they would use, and the subterfuge actually was a form of security that they used, because I don't know why people think that Native Americans got along really well, but they weren't all like that. They actually there was a lot of intertribal warfare. That doesn't make them bad people, okay? In fact, a lot of that stuff was again, I think, part of the Archon infection. That has gotten worse, by the way. It's gotten worse. If you notice, all the tribal people have been eradicated, more or less. There's very few left.
I've talked about that. That's terrible.
Okay, but it's not accidental.
It's systematic, it seems.
Yes, because they do not serve the Luciferian agenda.
Well, and they have ancient knowledge that it seems the powers that be don't want passed on to the next generation.
Clearly. And right, it's incompatible with this so-called technological revolution that we're going through, again, supposedly for our own good. I mean, look, they lived so-called tribal lives, which just means family. They were very much connected to each other and the planet. And more importantly, they understood and respected the divine feminine, which is something that we do not do. And so it's incompatible. That's why in my hometown of Malibu, one of the largest genocides in America took place under the Spanish. The Franciscan Brotherhood went in there and committed genocide against what they called the Chumash. I don't think they called themselves that, but it's actually pronounced Humash. It's something to do with light, but it's something that Jewish people are familiar with. They know that the stone Torah is also called that, the Chumash. It's not a coincidence, okay? So in any case, the tribal people around the world have been just exterminated because, and it's not the first time. Like I said, look at what they did in Atlantis. Enki had created all these monstrosities, and they had to be destroyed. So they were ultimately wiped out. He said he would stand back. If you remember Sitchin's take on all this, he said his family said, "We're going to wipe it out. We want you to stand down. Do not interfere." Okay, well, all right. But he did. He spoke to what most people call Noah. I believe some people call him a different name, Ushputnam, something like that. Very weird, tongue-twisting name. But the biblical Noah is a retelling of a very much older story where Enki saved a portion of humanity to reseed this world to his liking, not to his family's liking, but to his liking. So, and that's just the most recent thing. We've had, my understanding after reading Wes Penray's papers is that the original inhabitants almost 500,000 years ago here were hermaphrodite. They were very tall. They were unusually peaceful and symbiotic. They had the ability to biolocate or what do they call that? Project, astrally project. I guess some people call it remote viewing. In other words, going out of body and traveling that way was really easy for them. And it was by design. So everything here was it was a paradise. It was a library for DNA from a lot of regions of the empire. And incredibly diverse. So, but it was all very peaceful and sustainable, and it was, like I said, it was going to be a blueprint if it worked out. Unfortunately, as I said, at some point, Enki, when he started the war, civil war, he came here and took over and turned it from a paradise planet into a parasitic prison, which we've been living in for, it seems, here's the other thing. It seems like a long time to us only because our lives have been shortened so greatly. We're not supposed to die at age 60 to 90, whatever that is. I mean, even in the Bible, it talks about people living to be 1,000, and which is not a long time at all. It really isn't. We should live a lot longer. But again, this is another thing that they do to us. When we are recycled, as we pass over, they get us agree to come back. They wipe our memories. They induce amnesia intentionally on us, just like what he did that night when I was up in the mountains of Malibu. I still don't recall that, okay? If those two women hadn't come up to me and told me those things, and I believe that was done by the benevolent ones, I think that was the work of the benevolent ones. But if I didn't have that information, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now, because I would have just dismissed the whole thing. I would have wanted to be in denial because it was very uncomfortable. It's still uncomfortable for me to even think about it, let alone experience those things. Because part of me re-experiences every time I tell this. It's not just, this isn't words coming out of my mouth, people. This is my life. This was a life that almost ended in a way that I thought was incredibly evil and unnecessary. Not to mention the trauma that was induced in the grandparents. I mean, to say they were in a state of shock would be an understatement. They were traumatized badly, badly, okay? The whole family was, obviously. And so is the human race. I mean, this is the human condition. We are really screwed up. But it's not because of original sin. It's not our fault. That's like telling a rape victim you had it coming because you dressed sexy. I mean, please. It's not the case. It just isn't.
What you describe as the original Earth people, tall, hermaphrodites, able to astral project, very telepathic, that sounds very similar to what Credo Mutwa discussed when he is, he's been around, he's an old guy, and he's got some ancient knowledge from Zulu. He's a shaman he's a part of these mystery schools and societies out there, and said very similar things about how the original Earth people were literally, they talked to each other telepathically, and animals, and were peaceful people, were one sex essentially, and then these spaceships or these beings came from the heavens, and there was a red and a blue essentially is how I described it. There was two different types, and you could pick, do you want to go to the left, do you want to go to the right? So I wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, there is. But, you got to understand, it's like the game of telephone. Because of these oral histories over time, as they're repeated and passed on generation to generation, a lot of times there's something lost in translation, or people tend to embellish or misrepresent. I'm not saying it's wrong, okay? It's just, this is where myth comes from. It becomes something, it's diluted over time. Diluted, okay, not delusional. It becomes less accurate the further you move away from the original event. So the retelling of it is a little bit distorted. But I found that, there's a secret society amongst the Chumash people of Malibu. And I got to know them a little bit in a very strange way. It was part of my awakening, part of the process. It may have been one of the reasons that a lot of this stuff happened, because I believe that they were the guardians of the Chumash people. They were the glue that held them together. They weren't from California. They were from Egypt. And they were a small group of people that spoke a completely separate language. And they knew they were aware of the archons. Obviously, they didn't call them that, at least not that I'm aware of, because no outsider to this particular secret society would know. How could they know? They spoke a separate language, only amongst themselves. And the reason they did that is because they knew we'd been infiltrated. Okay, so it was very difficult for them, very difficult. But they managed to somehow create a nation of disparate people and hold them together and protect them to some degree up until the time when there were, I think it was 1824. What is considered the Chumash revolt by the Spaniards was actually a very ominous time. There was a double comet passed overhead, which the on top, that's the name of their group, on top, ANTAP is the way it's spelled in English. They noticed that these double comets were coming over, and that the Spaniards had returned in force, and they were building these what they call missions, which are actually fortresses, and they were starting to convert people to Christianity or Catholicism, actually Catholicism, and that was the year that the Spaniards decided that the only way that they could take control was to break up the on top secret society. So they literally murdered some of them in cold blood, and they said to the Chumash that anybody who is caught harboring the remaining on top leaders will be killed, and their family will be killed, because these on top, your leaders, are actually terrorists, pedophile, homosexual, whatever name they could think of. I mean, every horrible name you could think of. And that is what caused the revolt. The Chumash people rebelled against the Spaniards at that moment. And what was left of the on top society, they told the Chumash, stop what you're doing. These people are insane. They will kill you. They will kill all of you. They don't care about you. You have two choices. You can either go into hiding, or you can go live with them. That's your only choices. But you have to stop fighting with them, because they'll just kill you all. And actually, most of them did die anyway from diseases. But the few that were remaining are completely interbred with Spanish blood. They've been converted. Most of them have Christian names. So there's very little left of them. But the funny thing about the name on top, ANTAP, it literally means House of Orion. And that it took me a long time to figure that out. Okay, there's just a lot of things in this. It's all relative, all right? I mean, 30 years is nothing, but for somebody, a human being here under these conditions, it seems like a long time, seems like a lot of effort. But, and I apologize for being so long-winded about these explanations, but it's pretty complex.
Oh,
and I'm trying to put it in the
please don't
proper
apologize.
context.
No, this
Well, I
is
just
great.
feel like, I know, but look, man, I feel like I'm just sitting here rambling to you and your audience a lot of times about this information. And if people want more, I put out a lot of free information. So does Wes Penray. And so I know a lot of your stuff. I know you have a subscription thing, but a lot of our stuff ends up being free, and as it should be, because I think we all have a need to know this information. What you do with it after that is completely up to you. But through my
99%
website.
of our stuff's free too.
Oh, good. So yeah, I mean, this is not what we do for a living. I mean, I have a regular day job, but I do think that I have found that there are a lot more people that are responding or receptive to this information right now, this level of information, because people want to understand. They're tired of walking around going, God, what is going on? This is incomprehensible. Why are people doing this? Why are they behaving this way? And so I'm giving an explanation. You may agree or disagree. You may like it or not. But this is what I've learned. And of course, some people do write to me, and I write back to them through email. There's an email at my website. It's actually editor@unicusmagazine.com, or you can just click on a link at my website. They're everywhere. So I have nothing to hide here. Okay, I don't have some weird hidden agenda. I'm not working for some secret cabal like some people I think are out there being very, very disingenuous. And I mean, it's terrible. It's really sad. We've been so badly abused. Oh, I'll leave you with this. So what we have on this planet is two kinds of people: those that feel that they are victims, and they act as such, which is a position of weakness. And then there's, on the other end of the spectrum, are those who say, I'm a survivor, like myself. I'm a survivor, which is a position of strength, independence, sovereignty. Okay, I don't need to be saved. I don't need to be forgiven. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. I learn. I move on. Okay, and I'm not here to condemn anybody. All right, I'm just sharing information, and more importantly, my analysis of this information. And hopefully it helps, because that's my real intent here. Okay, and some people get that. Most people get that. A few people don't. They feel offended or whatever, and I understand that. They're entitled to their opinion. We all are. But we also have a responsibility. Just because we're under the influence doesn't mean that it's okay to do harm to others or ourselves, by the way. In fact, we have a greater responsibility to control our thoughts and emotions. It's one of the articles that I put out. It was actually my final article on this subject. It's called The Antidote for Archons. It gives people some guidelines, hopefully a better understanding of how important it is for us to be in control of our emotions, because if we're not, we will be controlled by our thoughts and emotions externally. And that leads to all kinds of terrible consequences.
Absolutely. And I certainly appreciate you spending so much time with us, and recommend our audience go to unicusmagazine.com. If you have an opportunity to pick up a copy of Close Encounters on Capitol Hill, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. And if I could just ask you one more question before we close out tonight. Fantastic. The question is, you brought up a little while ago about how when this earth was originally created and the beings that put us here, great intentions, paradise, etc., who are they?
It's a lot of that is found in the West Penray papers. They are originally would be the Queen of Orion. Yes, she's a Draco. She's a reptilian. Why is it that reptilians are bad? This whole planet was covered with reptiles at one time before we came along. Were they all evil? Don't think so. They had families. I think they were just regular entities. Now, whatever happened here, a lot of it, like I said, has been completely distorted over time because of the warfare. This is the first casualty of war. You may have heard this. The first casualty of war is truth. We're currently in the fog of war. We're suffering from that. So most of us don't have a clue what's going on. It's like a game of nine-dimensional chess. Most of us are just pawns. We are being pushed around by these various entities, and we don't even know it half the time. But the original intent by the Queen of Orion, Enki's mother, was to use this as a library for the DNA that she had created, and which diversified, and then she put it here, and it was just a way of I don't know, in farms they take their best stock, and then they try to breed it out because it's the best, right? You only want to breed the best. You only want to grow the best produce, whatever.
Right.
And so this was a way essentially of consolidating the best of the best. And we are related to her by blood through our DNA. She created that DNA. It's extremely complex. There's no way that happened through evolution. And the thing is, it's not one or the other. That's the other thing people got to realize. When you look at something, it's not all black, all white. It's not just creation, evolution. There's a bunch of different shades of gray in the middle. And people need to realize that. I know it takes some effort to do that, to really concentrate, focus, and not be completely judgmental and just throw everything away because you don't feel it fits. It takes some courage actually to do this kind of analysis and really learn about these things, especially because the information we're getting, most of it is really badly distorted, or it's simply incorrect altogether, intentionally to keep us ignorant. But it's changing, man. It's changing because of shows like this. The internet is weird. It's like it has some really amazing gems mixed in with some absolute garbage. And so I think we should take advantage of it as long as we can, because I don't think it's going to be like this much longer. I think it's shifting more towards the draconian or totalitarian and dictatorial. There's a lot of effort right now being made to bring us in, control us even more. I mean, Rex, why are we all under surveillance?
Well, because they want to know who to keep an eye on when they start rounding people up. They want to keep people's threat matrices set up. Even if they don't round people up, they want to just keep track of, could that guy be the one that's going to expose something or uncover a new revolution against us?
Okay, so I guess you could say we're a threat. I don't know that's the case. Honestly, most people are not paying attention to what we're saying. I feel, you already touched on it before with the previous guest, is that they are monitoring everything we do, everything we feel, everything we say, because they are modeling us so that they can predict, just so that nobody can catch them off guard. Look, I know we're being monitored by things that you and I don't even have access to. It's way beyond DARPA. It's way beyond the global surveillance system.
Can you give us a taste?
Well, I mean, look, I've had it shown to me that these UFO type craft literally can read our thought patterns. That's on a technological end. Those parasites, those mental parasites I was telling you about, not only can they whisper thoughts into our minds, they can listen to our thoughts as well, because they're in that other realm. They're, I mean, our thoughts, yeah, you can say there's a electrical chemical component. Okay. But what about the brain waves? Those are not physical.
But it's an energy.
Registered. It's an energy. It's a wave. And not only can it be read through technology, it can be picked up by entities that are in that other dimension already. So they know exactly what we're thinking. Why? Because they look at us as their property. They want to know what we're thinking. And sometimes it's really advantageous to them, because that way they can either trip us up, or they can cause us to like literally like puppets, they can cause us to do things that are to their benefit. Look, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I really appreciate you having me on, Rex. I'm kind of new to what, your channel at Leak Project, but I'm starting to look into it a little more carefully, and I think you're really doing great work. I got to commend you for it.
Well, thank you. It was an honor to speak with you, Robert, and you certainly know your stuff. I appreciate what you brought to the table. A lot of things you bring up about the Archons, I can certainly resonate with that. I can feel like this just dark force sometimes that seems to feed off of things. I can't see it with my eyes, but I can certainly feel it. And a lot of the things that you brought to the table, you did so eloquently that I'm sure many of our listeners can understand that as well. And, there's some very smart people out there that have some amazing ideas that don't relate 100% to what you're saying, but correlate with many of the things that you're saying. And, man, it just was great to speak with you, Robert, and I certainly hope we have an opportunity to speak again sometime.
Well, thank you, Rex.
Fantastic. And folks, once again, go to unicusmagazine.com. Also check out Close Encounters on Capitol Hill, Covert Encounters in Washington, D.C. Check out leakproject.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channels, youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord, and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Talk to you soon.